So I've always been a maker. I've always been an artist, and I've always been drawn to two-dimensional and three-dimensional objects. So I grew up knitting and crocheting and making all kinds of art with paper. And when I went to Brown as an undergrad, I majored in studio art, but I minored in cultural anthropology and women's studies. And so I'm really interested in the objects of people's lives, and I was particularly drawn to buttons and thread and sewing patterns and women's written correspondence, and a lot of those sort of detritus of women's work and domestic lives found its way into my artwork, particularly I think because I inherited my grandmother's button box, and I used to sit on the floor of her linen closet when I would visit her and go through her button box, and there was a lot of interesting things in there besides buttons. When I went to RISD, I started working more with those buttons and all those things. My work has moved from collage work to now more three-dimensional sculptural work with thread, paper, and the addition of wax, which I'm calling shadow drawings. I'm intrigued with the ways in which we interrelate, especially when these relationships are punctuated by physical distance or separation by time. So in this ongoing series of shadow drawings called String Theory, I visually nod to the visual complexities of interconnectedness, and I allude to the delicate and strong relationships which we form with one another over space and time. Working reductively to create dimensional lace with paper, thread, and wax, I literally and figuratively demonstrate that which is removed is as important as that which remains. So I've been pushing this series for about 10 years. I think it's really important to come into the studio sometimes and just play with materials. And so I picked up a piece of paper and I had my sewing machine set up and I just started sewing on this piece of paper. The way I make these string theory pieces, they start with very large sheets of Reeves BFK paper, and they begin as drawings. And the structure of the piece is built into the drawing. Once the drawing's complete, then I stand at my ironing board actually and drape the paper over, and I pre-poke all of the holes. Then I erase all of the lines, and then I hand sew, and then after I've sewn it, I take an X-Acto knife and I cut along the line of the stitches. And so I'm cutting out all of the negative space. And then I have fabricated a really interesting way to dip large sheets of paper in beeswax with Damar resin. And so usually it takes 2 people, and we very gently dip the paper through a trough of 120-degree beeswax. And once the paper is saturated with the beeswax, it really transparentizes the paper so the light bounces off and within the paper in a different way than it does without the wax. Multiple light sources create almost a visible dance of light on the wall behind, and that's really what the pieces are about, are the shadows that the white stitching on the white paper create on the wall. String theory is giving visual reference to those human connections, and the negative space being a metaphor for the human connections between people. For example, the relationship that you might have with a grandparent who's no longer alive. You still have memories and you still have a connection to them. Ultimately, I would love to see this series, this string theory series, made out of probably something more substantial than paper and thread and wax. And I could imagine it hanging on the outside of a skyscraper, 90 feet by 50 feet, and using the sun as the light source, moving around the building to create the shadows. So that's where I'm hoping to go.